Much like what Resident Evil did for survival horror, the Blair Witch Project was a genre-defining film when it was released in 1999, popularizing the found footage horror movie and paving the way for dozens of imitators, some good and some not so much. When a new game based on the Blair Witch series, which previously saw a lackluster sequel and an even more lackluster reboot, was announced at E3 earlier this year, I was a little bit surprised, but with the recent spat of successful horror titles like Resident Evil 7 and Outlast 1 and 2, it seems somehow fitting that this is coming out now, 2 decades after the original movie was released. Developed by Blooper Team, the folks behind Layers of Fear, another popular narrative-driven first-person horror game, you play the role of Ellis, an ex-cop who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in the military, presumably during Desert Storm, considering this takes place in 1996, although it doesn't really specify. The game begins with Ellis and his canine friend Bullet heading into the forest of Burkittsville, Maryland, aiding the police in the search for a young boy who vanished while around the area. You'll immediately notice the graphics are passable but not tremendous. The footage you're seeing here is on PC with the settings maxed out, running an RTX 2070 Super, and while the environments look pretty detailed, there's something a bit lacking in the overall quality, but again, it's pretty good for a sub $30 game. This isn't taking into account the bugs, which I'll get into later. After Ellis arrives at the meeting point for the search, he finds the people have already departed into the woods, so he grabs a walkie-talkie and begins his own search. The walkie-talkie will be one of 2 means of communication with others in the game, the second being your cell phone, which is used to periodically speak to your wife, Jess. Things get creepy fairly quickly, though the horror elements do ramp up a bit slower than some may prefer. Of course, it's nothing like the slow burn of the original movie. Headphones are recommended when playing, and it's easy to see why, as every little snapping branch and random animal sound in the forest causes concern for Ellis's safety, especially when things take a turn for the supernatural.
Stuck.
Luckily, Bullet is acting as both a friend and protector, helping you find clues and pointing you in the direction of danger. This mechanic of having a dog companion is a welcome addition, and even though it gets a bit janky at times, who doesn't want to have a dog by their side when going on a harrowing adventure? At the beginning, the game asks you to take care of Bullet, and your relationship with him will influence certain things later on, but I didn't see any actual evidence of this aside from a decision that needs to be made near the end. Another similarity to the film is that much of the game involves you navigating Ellis through a labyrinth of trees and foliage, periodically backtracking through the twisting paths and overgrowth, which may lend itself to the atmosphere of the game, but it too often feels like a chore. The game mostly consists of moving from point A to point B, collecting small morsels of clues along the way, and inching closer to not only finding the whereabouts of the missing boy, but uncovering the mysteries of this forest, which, as legend has it, is inhabited by a witch, the Blair Witch. Though not frequent, there are some situations where you could get Ellis killed. There are these demon-like creatures that lurk in the darkness and periodically attempt to murder him, but these sequences never pose much of a challenge. Bullet will face the direction they're coming from, and you just need to shine your flashlight in that direction to get rid of them. There's some light puzzle solving and a few other fun little set pieces like this minecart bit, but there's nothing terribly original here, although it's all perfectly serviceable.
Oh, shit. No, don't stop now. further.
Being the Blair Witch, of course, there's a camera mechanic at play, which unsurprisingly is used to see things like invisible enemies and portions of the trail that you need to follow. An added mechanic that doesn't really add much to the game is the idea of using the camera to manipulate time. This comes from certain red-colored tapes you find where you can pause the video at a specific moment and cause things in the real world to materialize or change. A couple of these are kind of cool, but after the second time you do it, it becomes clear that this is more of an afterthought, and it's not really used to its fullest potential. As for the horror elements, Blair Witch is a bit of a mixed bag as well. Although a couple of the jump scares did get me, there's a surprising lack of dread throughout the story, and I never quite felt the same amount of nervous unease as I did playing something like Resident Evil 7 or Alien Isolation. Perhaps this is due to the frequent hallucinations and flashbacks Ellis has, which significantly lower the stakes when we know most of the scary stuff that he's seeing isn't a real threat anyway, at least not physically. Honestly, I was more concerned about the well-being of Bullet, hoping at the beginning of every set piece that nothing terrible befalls him. The big finale is a slight redemption with another callback to the movie, saving the most terrifying bit for last. Unfortunately, this section is so drawn out, it almost feels as if the developers were padding the playtime, which is only about 3.5 hours to begin with. The PTSD element to the game feels entirely too heavy-handed and borderline insensitive, boiling a real disorder to a random series of flashbacks where Ellis hears bullets and mortar fire and envisions his former squad mates dying. This is something that becomes more prevalent as the game progresses, and it adds little to the narrative overall. And to me, it'd be more horrifying to witness a man who is in top psychological health, slowly driven mad by the horrors of the forest and the dark entities that reside in it. That being said, it's still an interesting avenue to go down, where you have this failing relationship with his wife, and the PTSD that he has causes something else to happen later on in his career as a cop that plays a big role later on in the game as well.
Monarch, this is Foxtrot 1. We're surrounded, sir. There's at least 4 of them.
Now, I can't speak to the console version, but as for this review, the PC port needs a little bit of work under the hood. Aside from a few strange glitches where Bullet seems to teleport around the map, I encountered one instance where I was completely frozen in place, unable to move, seemingly stuck in a tree. And at first I thought the game was forcing me to stand still as it began during a bit of dialogue, but after 5 minutes, I realized this is not expected behavior. Later, near the end of the game, I encountered an issue where I was running around this cavern, unable to progress any further, and after 10 minutes, the game would just crash. So I reloaded, and I went through the whole sequence again. Same thing happened, tried it a third time, happened again. Now, this is pre-patch. There was a day one patch that was released that fixed a lot of these bugs and optimized the game to run better, but I'm still seeing people report performance issues and problems. After the patch, I was able to get through the rest of the game, and I didn't really have any major performance issues either. Currently, Blair Witch is on sale on Steam for $26.99, and if you're a subscriber to Microsoft Game Pass, you can get it for free included with your subscription, and that's on PC as well as Xbox. But the relatively short playtime, unpolished feel, and lackluster narrative makes this a title I probably wouldn't recommend picking up until at least one more patch and maybe an additional price drop. I think $19.99 is kind of the sweet spot for this. But again, if you have Game Pass, then I would definitely recommend giving it a look because it's free. What's it going to hurt? And that's going to do it. I thought that this was significantly more fun than some of the other survival horror type games like this out there, but it's certainly not in the upper echelon of them. Thanks for watching. I know I don't do too many of these video game reviews, but I really love doing them. So if you want to see more game reviews, preferably cinema related, let me know in the comments. And for all things film, visit filmpulse.net. My name's Adam Patterson. We'll see you next time.
I hate when people do that.